So I'm Claire Bergman. I'm the senior leadership for SWOCO, which is a School of Social Work student organization. And I'm really happy to be leading this event with Tamara, and I'll have her introduce herself as well.
Hi, everyone. My name is Tamara. I am the president of SWOCA, Social Workers of Color Alliance. Thank you all for joining us. I'm really excited to hear all your answers and be able to engage with you all and learn more about all you professors. Thank you.
Yeah, and so I posted the pre-written questions that we had in the chat, so we'll kind of go through those with each of our speakers, and then we'll also open it up to questions from those who are here joining us tonight. And feel free to put those in the chat, and then Tamara and I will read them aloud once we get to that Q&A section. So we can kind of just go through each speaker if you want to do the brief description of yourself and your work. And Guillermo, if you want to start us off, that would be great.
Okay, sorry, Claire. I start with my 10 minutes, or with just a brief thing.
We can do the brief introduction for each, and then we'll kind of go into each question. If that sounds good.
Oh my gosh, Marion's daughter is over there. I can't.
So precious.
I mean. Oh, she's so cute, Marion. Oh, okay, Claire, I'll try to do my best.
No, you're good. I know.
I haven't met her, so it's...
Littles are so precious. I love it.
Yeah. I'm Guillermo Sangüesa. I'm a social worker. I graduated at Catholic University in Chile in 2003, I think. So it's almost 20 years of professional, exercise over there, and some time here as well in the States. I got my PhD from the University of Michigan in 2014, and my areas of passion and research and teaching and everything is around prisons and prisoner reentry, citizens who come back after incarceration, and that's and the the cognate topics around it, neighborhood violence prevention, and so on. I could keep talking, but
no, that's perfect. We'll definitely build on that for sure. Professor Donato, if you want to go, or Dentato, I'm sorry. I said that right.
That's okay. You can also call me Michael. Good evening, everyone. And I want to thank our amazing colleagues at SWOCO and SWOCA for bringing us together to talk about an important topic to me, and I hope to all of us. I am an associate professor in the School of Social Work, and similar to my dear colleague Guillermo, I've got about 20 or 25 years now of work in the field. I was doing a lot of clinical practice work in New York City when I graduated from my social work program. Then I started doing more advocacy and policy work in Miami before I entered academia. And I've been at Loyola for 12 or 13 years now. It seems like forever. I guess my area of specialization is to look at the impact of health and mental health disparities upon LGBTQ+ populations, as well as how to effectively prepare students for practice with diverse populations. So there's a sprinkling in there of substance use topics that I've been interested, as well as minority stress factors as well. But I'll pause there. Thank you.
Wonderful, thanks. And then Marion.
Hi, everyone. My name is Marion. I use she, her pronouns. I am a Chicagoan, born and raised on the South Side, a predominantly Black area and neighborhood of Chicago. I'm a mom, as I mentioned, which is also a big part of my identity currently. I just started here at Loyola. I'm an assistant professor, and I just started here in the fall. But I have worked here in Chicago in the area of mental health, really spanning a range of settings. So from community mental health to inpatient psychiatry, and really primarily with adults oftentimes people of color dealing with a range of mental illnesses. So what you might see in private practice all the way to people with chronic and severe mental illnesses. And my research is really at the intersection of place, race, and mental health, and thinking about the ways in which what I call place-based racism impacts the mental health of Black women and mothers.
That's wonderful. And then Dr. Rai to finish us up.
Hi, everyone. You can also call me Abha. My pronouns are she, her, hers. I have been at Loyola University for almost about 2 years now, which is unbelievable because most of it has been during the pandemic. So I've barely seen colleagues, but thankfully I've seen almost everyone here in some way, shape, or form. So I'm excited. Thank you for organizing this panel and really important conversation. My area of research interest primarily is around immigrant and refugee well-being, and mostly I focus on immigration policy. So I've been very interested in, I've been working mostly around policies by past President Trump and current immigration policies by President Biden. And I'm also interested, a self-focus is on domestic violence or gender-based violence. So primarily a lot of my work also focuses on domestic violence among immigrant communities. In terms of my experience, I got my MSW from back in India, and I have most of my practice experience has been with the community, both in India and here in Chicago. In Chicago, primarily, I've been working with immigrant serving organizations. I've worked a lot with Apna Ghar here, and back in India, all of my work was around domestic violence with the community. I would say about like 10 or 12 years of practice experience. I always knew, I think I wanted to be a social worker. I always knew that I wanted to work with the community. So I guess engaging with the community is what makes me happiest. And I'm really happy to share all of that with you all today. So thank you.
Thank you all. That's a great introduction to each of your areas of interest and your current work and previous work. So next we'll kind of go into how do you identify, if you're comfortable sharing that, and then how that identity has impacted your work as a social worker. We can go ahead and just go back to Guillermo so we kind of give each person space.
Thanks, Claire. I'm very good at talking, super good. Do I start my 10 minutes now or just answering, that the questions in chunks?
You can go ahead. I was thinking maybe if each person would answer all the questions all at once, just to make it easier, just to go around the room. I think that would be really great. So you can go ahead. You can start your 10 minutes. So,
thanks, Tamara and Claire. First of all, thanks everyone for the opportunity to speak with you this evening. I feel quite honored and and hope to be enthusiastic and it's a privilege to share with you my experiences and having the opportunity to be listened. I would say that I depart this conversation from my side, at least from 3 premises or 3 assumptions. For me, it's rather than talking about identity like a fixed, unique, monolithic thing, I would prefer to talk about identities that interact, because the notion of identity could be misleading if exacerbated. That's my first thought about this question. And secondly, I would say the complexity of social problems. Not a single variable can explain the entire picture. So that's related to the first assumption. When one talks about identity like a monolithic one thing, it doesn't at least as a social worker, I think that the notion of identities may help to disentangle complex, weak social problems. Then the issue of identities and social change to me is more of an endeavor rather than a fixed characteristic. Having said that, of course, there are issues of identity, right? I'm a social worker from a distant foreign country, a developing country like Chile, that almost nobody knows about it, right? In Latin America, some may say that I am Hispanic, Others may call me Latino. I hold a PhD in social work and sociology in a US institution, though. So it's starting from that, I have different identities, right? But at the same time, I'm a male, heterosexual, and foreigner individual. Okay, my socioeconomic status is a lower medium class. I am first generation in college in Chile. Also, my identity or identities have been framed within a native country, which was under a cruel dictatorship for many years. As a result of that, my native country is very individual-based, neoliberal, conservative. It's one of the most conservative countries in Latin America, and also is a developing country, as I said. Part of my endeavor as a social worker also has to do with the fact that I am a Catholic, not raised Catholic, but I embraced Catholicism during my youth. Meaning, I'm mentioning that because to me, religion has to do with religare, the Latin expression that means reunite human beings with one another and human beings with their creator. I found this Catholic Church to me have been source of hope, source of disappointment, a place where I can pray, a place where I can meet other people, a place where I can find some guidance, some reconciliation, some celebrations, etc. Also, I'm a social scientist. I use concepts and research tools to develop solutions for big problems, particularly my passion, which is related to prison systems and incarceration and the cognate topics that are related to that. I am mentioning this because, as you may see, I am influenced. I've been influenced thus by different traditions, different mentors, and different schools of thought as well. In the US, in Chile, in academia, outside academia, my parents have influenced me, my wife, my colleagues, my students, former and current ones, and even some priests, and even some strangers. Today, what can I say? I am a scholar, I'm a professor, I'm a social worker, I'm a father, I'm a husband, I'm a citizen, I'm an immigrant, I'm a foreigner, you know. What else can I say? I try to, with this idea of identities, right? Why I am emphasizing this? Because I'm trying, as a developing country, you cannot find, at least in terms of scientific tools or scientific, development, social work is not very much developed in a country like Chile. So that's why I try to improve the training that I originally received over there, and try to enhance my both conceptual and methodological repertoire of tools. As a person of science, of social science, I like self-observation, reflexivity, awareness. Science, one of the things that science has taught me is being aware of my own limitations, and at the same time, the willingness to improve myself and to improve other people's lives, based on science, based on research, based on methods, right? This multiplicity of identities has also brought me a more global and comparative perspective. But some issues that in the States seems to be like natural or obvious, to me are not necessarily obvious. And in that way, I try to keep self-reflective and to avoid naturalizations of systems, practices, or schemes. This is not to say that systems, practices, or schemes are useless, but just I'm trying not to naturalize them. One of the things that this multiplicity of identities has impulsed me to do has to do with defeating the injustice of the system by using the system's own tools, like science, like for example, in the prison, in the prison realm and all the related, I try to conduct much of my research in showing how much expensive it is to keep people incarcerated and how ineffective and inefficient it is, rather than investing in rehabilitation programs and preventing people from arriving to prison in the first place. What time is it? Oh my gosh, I've tried, based on this multiplicity of identities, I would say I try to cultivate the dialogue with other disciplines. I'm fascinated with that. It's not an easy thing to do, but it's something that one may appreciate as a people, living in different contexts. I try, of course, to focus on disadvantaged population, which for me, incarcerated people are so forgotten and so important. As a Christian, as a social worker, as a person of color, if you see incarcerated people, not only in the States, but also worldwide, those are usually people from what we name, as we name them in the States, people of color. In Chile, in Latin America, in Asia, in the States, in Europe, immigrants, indigenous people, right? And we punish them, and we do not provide equal opportunities for all of our people in the first place. What else can I say? I'm not sure if I am addressing your question. Just this is what I was reflecting upon this afternoon when I was preparing for this talk.
You're doing great. No, that's perfect.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I think I have 30 seconds just to finish. I'm as a person, of these multiple identities, I've tried to remain open to learn from others, not just colleagues, of course, colleagues, but also practitioners, incarcerated people themselves, prison guard, prison officer, colleagues, people from other disciplines, etc. And one thing that I've learned is try to challenge myself all the time, not afraid of taking risk or big bets. And for the greater glory of God, I say today, for the advancement of social justice and for social change. But okay, thank you for listening.
Thank you so much, Guillermo. That was really great. Thank you. So I think next we have Michael. We're going to Michael. Yes, go ahead, Michael.
Okay. Just for the record, you're privileging the male voices with my colleagues present. So talking about identities. Sorry, I'm just being snarky. When I thought about this evening's discussion, similar to what Guillermo said, I don't think about one identity. I think about the multiple pieces of who I am. And it usually starts with being a social worker. And it's always started there, right? Which is really interesting because I have had a lot of privilege in ignoring my skin color, and I've had a lot of privilege in ignoring my gender. Still do. And I've had to become a lot more conscious about that, right? And I still am becoming more conscious about that in ways in which I can use those identities to support, those that aren't male or those that aren't white, right? Or from the majority groups. I think the big piece of identity that's always factored in for me is being gay. And I think it's been very difficult for me to work with clients over the years that are gay because of a lot of countertransference issues, a lot of, challenges about wanting to help, to save, to protect, all that kind of savior stuff going on. And I've had to really keep that in check, both with clinical supervision, with administrative supervision, and by being in therapy. And I think that when I think about ways in which my identity has benefited my work, there's many ways, but it's also been challenging to my work as a social worker too, both at the micro level and as a more meso and macro level social worker. So I think like a couple of examples of this I wanted to share, and I know that I usually share this in my practice course, were like working with queer youth in Miami and advising them not to come out because it wasn't safe to be out with their families. And these were predominantly Hispanic, Latin, and Haitian youth that I was working with. And it like broke my heart to be able to say to them, you can be whoever you want to be in our program, and you can vogue and you can do whatever you want. You can gender bend and change pronouns, have no pronouns, whatever. But when you leave this door, like, I wonder about your safety and I worry about your safety. And that was always really, really hard for me when I think about my own identity and working with, you know, queer youth. The same has been true, I think, moving into academia. And again, thinking about the ways in which I can use my privileged identities and not so privileged identities to support students and be a better educator in the classroom in doing so. Again, a complete work in progress. I'm by no means, I'm on the journey of being a better ally and advocate. But I think I've learned a lot. And I think one example of that was a conversation with Stephanie Chapman. And I was teaching a lot of LDSS courses and policy courses, which are great. Love the macro stuff, right? And she was like, why don't you teach the diversity and oppression course? And I was like, oh my God, I don't want to teach that course at all. I was worried about teaching that class. And it has really pushed me in a lot of ways, both personally and professionally, to grow. And now, of course, I don't want to teach anything else but the diversity and oppression class. So I think that when I think about my identity, I think about my identities. I also think that there are invisible parts of my identity that no one knows, and they relate to my health and something that I've struggled with my entire life. And I think we often don't talk about invisible identities. And I think they're really important, right? Because we often see what we want to see, and what we can't see doesn't matter. And I think that that's a really big problem, both, no matter where you are in practice, micro, meso, or macro. What have I learned about my own identity? That I think I can be a better advocate and ally, especially to the LGBTQ plus community. You know, I've navigated my own internalized homophobia and transphobia and bi-erasure and all that kind of stuff. And it's something that I've had to become much more conscious about and continue to be. So yeah, I think I'll pause there. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Michael. Thank you for sharing. So now I think we can move on to Marion.
Okay. Brooke is watching Baby Shark, so I'm going to go as quick as I can while she's occupied and she's eating string cheese. And so I have already mentioned that I am a Black woman and mother, a new mom, and those things. And where I'm from really, really shapes my identity. It's important to me because I think about the ways in which in my work and in my life, that even as I think about racism and how that impacts one's mental health, we experience racism locally. Racism in Chicago looks very different than it do in other places. And so I think it's important as we begin to try to measure the impact of mental health better, that we really begin to think about how one experiences that locally. So I always, it's important to me in my work, and I often lead with where I'm from and how I'm thinking about my work, as well as the fact that I still live here and my social work practice has all been here, right? And so I think that has also really been shaped by my location. And so thinking about identities even more, you know, I often think of myself as a Black woman first and foremost, and sometimes only, given the world in which we live in. And so, you know, when I think about my identity as a Black woman, also as a first generation college student, and really first generation high school student, up until about 10 years ago, my mom went back and got her GED at like 60 years old. It was the best thing in the world. And so, you know, seeing those, being from these communities, seeing the inequities that exist in these communities, that really drove and shaped my motivation and drive to, one, improve social conditions for Black people and Black communities, also to improve their mental health and well-being, and beyond that, to really help prepare other social workers and mental health professionals to support communities of color. I always saw these things as going hand in hand because I know lived experiences really matter. And so when I think about okay, I want to, reduce stigma and get people into mental health treatment because I really believe in the power of mental well-being. But if they get to an office where the person doesn't understand their experiences or doesn't have a certain level of comfort or competence around working with people who may be different than them, then it'll be a miss, right? And so I really think about both getting people into support and treatment, but then also preparing professionals to do that. And that has been driven by my own lived experiences. When I think about, how my identities have been challenged as a social worker, I often go back to the experience I had. I worked at, which hospital was this? At UIC in a clinical research team. And what we did was it was a multi-site NIH large funded study where we were looking at psychotic spectrum disorders and really thinking about the ways in which individuals who experience either bipolar or some level of psychosis and their family members, their immediate family members. And we were trying to understand from neurobiology, even doing clinical assessments and really thinking about how we can ultimately try to better understand and prevent severe mental illnesses by doing these assessments. And so we would have to sit at a table and do these like consensus diagnosis. After we would spend hours with each individual, looking at their diagnosis, looking at their functioning, then we would sit at this table. And at these tables, I was the only person of color and I was one of two women. And so my gender and my race was there. And the majority of the clients that we, recruited into the study were often people of color. And so I always, like, my identity was so heightened because people would have, mental health diagnosis is a very subjective process and experience. So everyone was bringing their lived experiences to the table. And I was always that person thinking like, no, I see this a little differently. Have we thought about that? Or sometimes even being quiet because of, my own feelings of hurt and harm that were happening in those spaces when people would kind of make these generalizations or stereotypes about people and the places that they were from. And so being in that environment really, really challenged me in multiple ways. But it also led me to go into research and think more about like, how can someone like myself with my multiple identities be in these spaces, because it really matters even when we're trying to collect data and do research to improve the well-being of people. So I always think about that particular experience as I consider the ways in which my identity has really challenged me in my practice. One of the things that I've learned and I'm continuing to learn is that this just changes over time. As both of my colleagues have mentioned, number one, we're not monolithic people or groups of people. There is so much different variation and heterogeneity within group. And so even though I have been able to relate to and identify with many of the experiences of other Black women that I've worked with, there are many, 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 many differences. And I can look at myself from when I first started in practice to who I am now. I'm different, I've changed, and so it's so important as we think about identities that we really recognize these things as dynamic processes and that they change over time, and that's okay. It's actually a good thing from my perspective that we're growing and changing as our lives change. And so that's one of the biggest things I think I've learned is that how my identity presents in the room and how it kind of coalesces with my identity as a social worker really does change over time. And it is oftentimes shaped by the larger kind of macro level things that are happening in our society. So, if I think about, for example, even like the summer of 2020, right, where we know the uprisings and George Floyd's murder and things of that nature, I was thinking about my race much more than I probably was 10 years ago, for example, right, in my work as a social worker. When I individually, personally became a mother, some things shifted for me too. So it's not only about, what's going on in the larger environment, but really that interaction, right, between the person and environment and how those things continue to shape and change people's experiences over time. So that's, I think, has been the greatest lesson for me in my work that I do. I really try to look for variation qualitatively and quantitatively within groups. And I just want to continue to really think about those within group differences, because I think that's where there's a huge gap, in our understanding about minority stress, about mental health disparities and mental well-being, is that we too often just compare groups of people. And so as my colleague mentioned earlier, we really have to try to reimagine even how we think about identities as these fixed things that don't change over time, and really begin to view them in a different way so that we can have more informed treatment and approaches to treatment with people. I'm trying to think if I had anything else in my notes. those were the main things that I think are important to say now. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Marian. Really appreciate that. Now we'll pass it on to Abha.
Thank you. Well, thank you all for sharing all of your wonderful identities. I feel like just by being in this conversation, I'm learning so much. So thank you. I'll just share a few things. My notes are not as extensive, so I will keep it brief and then invite more conversation around the topic. So similar to what my colleagues have shared, my identities are also multiple. I don't feel like I have one identity that stands out. If someone were to ask me who I am, I would definitely, the first thing would be that I'm an immigrant. Sometimes I would also say, that I'm a person of color. I would tell them that I'm a woman, I'm a wife, I'm a daughter-in-law. I think those aspects of my identity are important to highlight the collectivist culture and collectivist family values that I come from, which informs my social work, which informs my positionality a lot. And all in all, I would always say I'm a social worker. I feel like I always say this in my class. I think you can never stop being a social worker. It's not like a job that you start at 9 a.m. and you finish at 5 p.m. and then you stop being that. I feel like you're always that. So that part of my identity always stays with me. And I feel like it'll always stay in some shape, way, or form with me. And as I thought more about, some of these prompts that y'all shared, I felt like sometimes parts of my identities make me a minority and some parts make me a majority, wherein I have privilege. So when I work with South Asian immigrants, I feel like I'm on the outside because they think I'm a researcher and I come with education, I have a PhD, probably I may be working with them through a grant. So I'm already at a different position compared to them. But when there are laws that are enacted around immigration, when I saw my friends and family members stuck abroad, I saw a conversation around Muslim ban, I was a minority. I was a minority in this country where I did not have a voice. I was not able to vote. I could not do anything. I was a minority in the sense that I was at the receiving end. So I had very little power. But I think with that identity, it gave me so much power to actually engage in active advocacy as a social worker, which I would recommend to anybody here. I think use your identity or identities to your advantage to the extent possible. So initially, I think when I first moved to the US a few years ago, I would constantly think about, my accent or some experiences with microaggressions, which in the moment, probably I didn't even realize that was microaggression. It would be like, oh, are you from South Asia? We really like Indian food. And initially I would just welcome those comments as compliments, but soon I started to realize that it can easily be, a microaggression that's, directed towards me. So I feel like I've used all of that energy instead of, losing heart or, feeling like I'm, always on the, I'm an other. I've used that energy, I think, to make myself part of the larger system. I am in the US for a purpose and I'm here now. So I think I've tried to use my identities or intersections to my advantage, which actually informs my social work. So all of the work that I do here, I feel like I understand some of the experiences of immigrants. Again, I'm not the only voice for immigrants. Obviously, I'm one person, so I'm one immigrant. So I feel like I use that in my conversation when I go to the community. When I go to the community, I remain conscious. So a lot of my work is with men and women. So a lot of times when we think about South Asian men or immigrant men, it's not easy for them to talk to someone who's female, maybe younger than them or the same age, about patriarchy or gender role attitudes or something like that. So a lot of times I try and remain conscious that I'm using language that's, not stigmatizing to anybody. So instead of domestic violence, I try and talk about healthy relationships, which could be inviting for men and women. So I think I've tried to use my identity, my positionality in my engagement with the community in that way. Another thing I would like to highlight, I know I'm switching questions, but another thing I would like to highlight is that I think my identity is really, really pivotal when thinking about my research. I feel like all of the questions that I ask, so recently I did a survey and I wanted to ask a question around people's visa. So I thought really hard about it. Like, what is the implication of asking a question like that? Can I ask it better? So I think that my experience and my identity really comes in handy when I'm thinking about data collection, responsible ways in which I can engage with the community and not traumatize them when I'm actually collecting any type of data. Similar to what Marian said, I think my identity continues to evolve. It continues to change. I don't think it's static. So I learn and discover something new about myself every day, a new part of my identity. And then one last thing, I will say that I also use my intersections of my different identities, my positionality, all of that in the classroom to the extent possible. Of course, similar to what Michael was saying, I'm not perfect. And I don't think I ever want to be perfect, because I think that if you get to the stage of being perfect, then you stop learning. And for me, I don't want to stop learning. So that is not a bar that I'm striving to achieve. I just want to keep learning every day. So in the classroom, I do a few things, which is I try and I guess normalize that it's a mutual learning process. For me, it truly is. It's not just a statement in the syllabus. I truly learn from my students. I make mistakes and I try to remain honest about it. If I've made a mistake today, and I make a lot of mistakes, I come back and address it and not brush it off, because I feel like the behavior that I model is something that people can carry forward in the field as well. And I try and remain respectful at all times, because there are identities that are visible and there are identities that are not visible, which can result in direct, indirect trauma, pains, etc. So I think the biggest thing is that as a social worker, I try to hold on to that identity. And like, you can never stop being a social worker, I'll say you can never stop being kind. So I try to do that. Hopefully I've answered all the questions that were asked. I'm sorry I switched around, but if you have any follow-up questions, I'm happy to talk more. But thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Rai. That was really great. We're actually going to open the floor for any questions for the panelists. And if anyone would like to put it in the chat, or if you'd like to say it out loud, you can raise your hand or even just unmute yourself. So.
Yeah, and I just wanted to point out too, I've been taking notes because I love everything that's been said so far, but I wanted to point out, like, Guillermo, you brought up the topic of multiplicity of identities, and through each of your conversation, like each of your kind of answering those questions, I was thinking about this idea of like the elasticity of identity, and that it ebbs and flows and changes and grows and shrinks, like Marian was saying, depending on what's going on at the macro level, but also in your community, like on the ground, in your home. And so I just wanted to point that out because I thought that was a really important point of the ebbs and flows of identity and how it grows and shifts through time. And one question I did have specifically for Marian, but this could be for anyone who identifies as a parent, is how do you describe identity and then help shape the identity of your child? What is that process? Like, your daughter's obviously 2, so she's still very small, but have you thought about that process and what that would look like?
That's a big question. No, we're just trying to potty train right now. But but honestly, when I think about her gender and her racial identity, I do. I'm not always conscious necessarily of the ways in which I'm doing it, but if I really reflect, I think I am doing it in different ways. For example, when I think about Christmas gifts, for example, I was really into like Barbies and like very like stereotypical gender kinds of things for girls. And so of course my natural thought was like, yes, her first Christmas, she's gonna have all the things, Barbies, baby dolls, strollers. And I was like, wait. What am I trying to socialize her to be? Let me step back a little bit and get some like cars and tools and other things that again are stereotypical as well. But those are one of the things that I begin to think about as I consider her gender identity, is just the way, the kinds of things I give her, what I expose her to as it relates for the things that she can play with. And my God, like you should see some of the things they have for little girls. It's really kind of scary, related to preparing them to be moms. She may not want to be a mom, but I digress. As I think about her racial identity, it's really important for me to make sure she has toys that of people who look like me, that she watches movies. It's probably a bad thing that I watch Disney, but again, none of us are perfect. But even within the context of Disney, we watch like Princess and the Frog a lot because it's the Black princess. And so, or we look at Mulan and other like women of color, or Encanto is my favorite one now. And so I'm excited to see some of the changes that are happening as it relates to the media, but I do try to be pretty conscious about the things that I allow her to watch and play with as I consider her racial and gender identity. But I think as I'm starting to think about, she's in a home-based daycare now, but as I start to think about like preschool and kindergarten and those things, it is becoming more of my reality, and I really need to think about it in a really critical way, what kind of spaces I want to put her in, because I think education is really the first place where kids really begin to get a lot of this stuff. And I want to, have some control in shaping how she, turns out in the world. So thanks for, prompting me to think about this even more.
Of course, I appreciate that answer. Anyone else who wants to jump in on that specifically is welcome to. But
Just keep her away from the cocoa melon.
Yes, I'm trying to.
Yeah.
I'll also say, just thinking about my research, I talk with a lot of Black mothers. And so they are oftentimes thinking about, racial socialization processes, right? And so that is when parents are really preparing their children for what it means to be a Black and brown child in this society. And so that's oftentimes teaching them how to protect themselves from discrimination and racism and violence. And so that really is a prominent aspect of parenting that has come up in my research related to Black mothers and their parenting of Black children, in particular kinds of neighborhood contexts. So it is, it's a real thing, and that causes stress for parents of color, for sure.
yeah, absolutely. Thank you for sharing that. I was thinking about that too, the conversations that one person may have with their child versus another based on just the color of their skin. It's amazing what this country has created in this world. So James, do you want to go ahead and unmute?
Yeah, thank you very much. Hi, Professor Malcolm. I really was interested when you were talking about, kind of examining the qualitative and quantitative, differences within groups. And I guess one of my questions is, with your research and then kind of applying it further, how do you, in a way, identify what within a group is really a good general trend versus, important differences within that group that you have to be cognizant of?
I'm thinking about an answer. For me, it's everything is significant, right? Because I think, what things make meaning, how people make meaning of their experiences matters, right? And so as I consider these differences, and when I'm thinking about quantitative differences, I'm really thinking about, okay, if we look at depression measures, for example, we all know that mental health disparities, yes, that's the letter Y. We all know that mental health disparities exist within communities of color, but everyone in communities of color are not depressed. everyone is not anxious, right? And so really thinking about the variation in that way. And for those people who are seemingly doing well, I want to understand what are the factors that are contributing to that, to them kind of, you know, adapting to those environments. What are their coping skills and mechanisms? So it's kind of hard to say. For me, it all matters. All the differences matter. And that's why I do both quantitative and qualitative research, because I don't just think about what is like statistically significant, right? Because there are some qualitative differences that also really matter. But I don't think it's really up to me to per se to decide what's important and what's not. I really try to let the data speak around what I'm seeing most women in my studies reporting on. Sorry for all the talking in the process. I hope that answered your question, James.
Oh, no worries. That was very informative. I appreciate it.
I know we have a couple other researchers too. Did anyone want to jump in on that question as well? I don't know if anyone. Michael, go ahead.
I think what's been important for me when I think about research is being more intentional with regard to including the voice and the voices of those that I'm going to be researching. So from the conceptualization of a research project to the development of a scale to the evaluation of the findings, like ensuring that I am working alongside the community in a very authentic and intentional participatory way is something that's changed a lot for me over the years compared to I'm just going to conduct a research study and I'm going to pick this population, I'm going to study that. It's really turned significantly for me when I think about, again, the inclusion of community and the inclusion of community throughout the entire process, whether it's, you know, qualitative or quantitative or mixed methods approach. So that's what I was just thinking of with James's question and Marion's response. What's evolved for me in being a researcher.
That's great. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much.
I was thinking a little bit about, Guillermo, you kind of mentioned like global perspectives that have impacted your identity. And I was wondering if you could kind of elaborate on that a little bit of how global perspectives have not only impacted your identity, but then that identity in your social work practice, if that makes sense.
I'll try, Claire, to do my best. Since I'm very good at talking, so I could interpret that question and keep talking for hours. But I mean, I've been challenged by, you know, but as I told you, I did my PhD in Michigan, you know, which is a good institution in the States in terms of social work. I was challenged by, you know, language barriers, cultural barriers, you know, being a foreigner for the first time in the US, not like just like a visitor, but like a student, PhD student. So, you know, we moved there with my wife. So it implied a lot of challenges. I like challenges. I think they open your mind, they make you get out of your comfort zone. And I think that social workers, it's always a good thing to get out of your comfort zone. I personally like challenges. I like to talk to engineers. I like to talk to policymakers. I like to talk to lawyers. But in that regard, I gotta put some effort in learning. Not everything, but at least some key elements for starting a conversation or for starting changing things. But I would say seriously, in the long term, sustainable changes require different people. And something that bothered me too much from social work in Latin America, at least from Chile, but I would say from Latin America in general, is this messianic idea of social work. Social work, like we are change makers. Of course we are, but everyone wants a better world, not just social workers. You know what I mean? So at that point is what I was meaning by not essentializing an identity sense. I'm a social worker, but at the same time, I want to talk to other people. I wanna be heard by economists, engineering, law, you know, policymakers, communities. And in that regard, I gotta push myself outside my comfort zone. And of course, there is part of that such identity in the sense of keeping that heart and that social change heart inside. But the ways, the path to do that are diverse, at least to me. And something that bothered me too much from Latin American, the style of social work, is this, you gotta be social worker just if you are all the time on the streets. That's over there. I mean, I'm just exaggerating things, okay? And I'm gonna rise in a second my critique towards the US way of doing social work, okay? But in Latin America, what bothers me too much is you are considered a good social worker if you are all the time on the streets. Left wing, super left wing, and extreme left wing, and it's never enough. That's too much for me sometimes. And in doing so, they lack theories, they lack methods, they lack publishing. I don't like that type of social work. And that's what I was looking for, something else. And I found that, or part of that, in the States. Having said that, what bothers me too much about the US social work education is this fixation with methods. If you don't have methods, if you don't have measurements, of course I like measurements, but if you don't have that, you eventually have no voice in public debates. What is that? What does it mean? And this US-centric approach, if you want to fix something in the States, you want to just talk about how the system is built in the US, and everything is US-centered. The publication scheme, the ideas, the circle of editors, and in doing so, it's I'm not using the word unfair, but it's a US-centric model. And in global times, you may need ideas, you may get benefit from ideas, from concepts, even from practices. Coming from a Latin American world with all the problems we have over there, you as a social worker learn how to run business with very much less resources, human resources, infrastructure. I cannot tell you the prison system over there. But even in the Chilean prison, with all the material precarity that we have currently there, still nobody escapes. And still prison guards may establish a connection with inmates, and even inmates can use their own clothes. And that simple thing keeps their own identity at some extent. I don't want to mention or meaning, I don't mean to glorify social work over there or over here. That's precisely what I love about this global social work perspective. If you see Europe, it's a different type of social work. If you go to Asia, they do different type of things. That's the beauty, the magic, and the complexity of social work worldwide. To me, the most important thing is remaining open to different ideas and critically ponder them, analyze them, see what may work, what may not work here, or vice versa. I've experienced the lack of methods of social work in Latin American countries, and the excess of rhetoric and just mass mobilization, which is one of the dimensions to me of a social work. But at the same time, I've experienced the uncritical importation of foreign models. Foreign model, mainly US. The US prison system has been exported to other countries. And the Chilean government and many other countries in the world are uncritically appropriated this model. And it's super ironic because the US is the country that proportionally incarcerates most people in the world, even more than Russia. That's so ironic. And many countries are just uncritically copying and pasting that model into their countries, spending, you know what I mean? So to me, a global perspective is very related to critical thinking. That's what I love about social work. You can learn from colleagues from other countries or from other cultures. And I'm surviving that. It's not easy, but because you belong here, but you don't belong here either. You belong to Chile, but also you live outside. So you are not really a Chilean. So you are criticized, you are seen with suspicious minds all the time. And you are continually adjusting. But as someone said, I think it was Abba, you try to pick up the most, or you try to get the most from different aspects and try to create your own thing. Thank you. I'm sorry for extending too much.
No, that was great. And I think you did speak to Ava's point of, also that we keep learning and we grow from one another, not only within our country, but across countries. And cross-cultural social work is so important. Cross-country social work is so important. And I know in our immigration courses, we have our migration studies subspecialization. We talk a lot about the neither here nor there, like that identity of like, I don't know where I belong. I don't feel like I belong here, but I don't feel like I belong there. And so that you brought up a lot of interesting points, Guillermo. So thank you.
I actually have a question for Apa.
Yeah.
I actually relate to your story a lot, and it was really interesting to hear you speak on your story. So my question is, and this is something I've thought about since I got into the program as a Muslim woman, there is not many immigrants or Muslims in this profession. So as an immigrant coming from a place that many people actually don't go into social work unless it's in their country, like Guillermo was saying, social work in different countries is a lot different. Like I'm from Jordan and it doesn't look like the way that it looks in America. And I bet it doesn't look the same as it does in India, So I was just wondering, how do you deal with that as a person, as a social worker who is from a country that not many people come to America and become social workers?
Yeah, I think that's an excellent question, first of all. And I agree, with your comments about social work in other countries and also something that Guillermo sort of shared. I do agree. Back in India, I don't think social work is as formal. It's changing a little bit right now. It is becoming more formal, established. But back when I started, everyone would wonder, they're like, are you doing it for free? They would always wonder. They're like, why can't you be a doctor or an engineer? So they would always be like worried about me, almost like, why do you want to do social work? So I think that I struggled a lot with. But as I knew for sure, my mom was a social worker, so I knew that there is a path for me to sort of follow. I started volunteering really early on. And thankfully, when I was married, my in-laws were also really cool about me doing my thing. I think it was a little shocking for them when I, told them or shared with them, this is my, dissertation topic for my master's, which was working with sex workers in a low-income neighborhood in Mumbai. So it's like the Amsterdam sort of neighborhood in Mumbai. So they were a little shocked when that happened. But I guess, we've all sort of come to understand that, it's a difficult field, but if you're passionate about it, I guess go for it. When I'm here, I feel like I bring back so much of all of my like macro learnings from back home. I feel like social work is so macro, like it's so community, so policy. So I bring all of that here, and I feel really fortunate that I've had that experience. And, now when I think about like global social work or think about doing any type of social work back in India, I think about it as doing social research, because social work is almost like the term social work is like people do it for free, or people who have lots of money, they do it on the side. So it's like a side hustle for people, just for fun. I want to do something good. So it's like that. But when I think about myself, I think about myself as a social scientist or a social researcher, where I'm not just giving out money for fun. I am actually trying to solve a social problem. So now when I go back to India, I look at like gender role stereotypes or things like that. It's not that I'm trying to give donations out. I'm trying to actually have a conversation about it and change the way people think. And this is something actually I've learned from the US, the rigor in social work research. I feel like I owe all of that to my PhD here. My social work approach was very different when I came in. It was very practice oriented. But here I feel like I've heard EBP so many times. Evidence, where's the evidence? Where's the citation? So that's like in my brain now. So anytime I think about doing something new, even back in India, I'll always remember, I'll always have my professor in my mind what's the citation? Who's tested this previously? So I feel like I'm now able to use evidence and actually test it and make that difference. So yeah, this is a really long answer to your question, but I feel like the best thing that's worked for me, and again, I'm like no gold standard for anything at all. I think the more I've been able to embrace my identity, the better I've felt about myself as a social worker here and back in India. I still feel like I'm living like dual lives. I have a different life as an immigrant here and back in India. Everything changes. My accent changes like this. I don't even shy, or it's not even like consciously I'm trying to do something. Everyone around there talks like that, so I talk like that. Everyone around here talks to me in a certain way, so I talk in a certain way. And similar to what Guillermo was saying, it's like sometimes you're an outsider everywhere. Here I'm an outsider because I look different. Sometimes I can talk different and act different. Back in India, I always hear, oh, you're so American, you're so American. And I'm like, really? I mean, I don't think so, but that happens a lot. So I feel like this is sort of like, a complex path for immigrant social workers and even people here living with multiple identities. I think it's a complex path for all of us, but I will say I'm sounding like, one of these like meditation gurus, but I do feel like the more we embrace, the more we are like we're owning our identities, the more comfortable we get. But I'm happy to chat more offline if I can be of any assistance.
Thank you. That was really great.